Hello friends, today I am going to cover the top 10 CSS interview questions. If you are new to CSS, then don't miss them, and if you are experienced, then revise the question at least one time, because sometimes we know only half and incomplete information. So let's start with the first question.
And yes, for a real interview experience, first hear the question, pause the video, then think about your own answer, then play my answer and compare it with yours.
What are CSS preprocessors? What is SCSS? CSS preprocessor is also one way to implement CSS, and this is slightly more complex in comparison to the previous ways. In this case, the CSS processors, we have to create one .css file like this in our project. For that, we have to install npm and sass also. And SCSS is a type of CSS preprocessor only, okay? And what will happen? This SCSS will be first converted into a CSS file, and that converted file will then be referred in the link element of the HTML file. Getting my point? Now, to relate it, to remember it, just focus on this name CSS preprocessor. Its English meaning is before CSS or pre-CSS. There will be a file of type SCSS or any other type which will then be processed to CSS file. Okay, related, right? That's good. So that's why the English is important, and that's why this implementation is called CSS preprocessor, because we have a file SCSS which will be processed in the CSS file. Now the important question is why we need this kind of CSS preprocessing or SCSS. Instead, we already have those direct normal CSS file. Why we need it? The answer is CSS preprocessors are scripting languages like SCSS. This is a scripting language that provide additional syntax and features that are not available in traditional CSS. Okay, so for example, variables, loops, and conditional statements. These are not available in normal CSS, but they are available in SCSS. For example, if you see the SCSS code, then here you can see we have defined variables in this SCSS file. Then you can use the variable base font for calculating the heading element font size dynamically. That is the purpose of the variables, right? Now, when the SCSS is converted to CSS, there you will receive the fixed multiplied font size. Now, this variable declaration and setting is not possible directly here in this CSS. Therefore, sometimes we need SCSS for big applications. Then we can also have loops, conditional statements, which are not possible in normal CSS. So that's why CSS preprocessors are essentials, and we need them in some scenarios. Great, that was the first point. And we already know the second point, that is SCSS is a type of CSS preprocessor only. Yes, there are other types also, which I will just share in the next question. But you have got the high level idea about what is SCSS and most importantly, why we need SCSS, right? Here is a very short question. What are the three types of CSS preprocessors? The first type, CSS preprocessors, we already know, and that is SCSS, which stands for Sassy CSS. Also, we call it SAS, which stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. And the file extension for them is .scss. This is the first type of preprocessor. Second type is less, and the file extension is also .less. This is the second type. The third kind of CSS preprocessors are stylus, and the extension is .style. There are maybe some more types, but I am not going into very much detail about this because they are like then a separate topic from normal CSS, and it is very much too much time taking. But yes, now you have the high level idea like, okay, what are the three types of CSS preprocessors? Alright friends, before moving to the next question, if you have not yet accepted the Never Give Up challenge, then accept it. Promise yourself you will never give up until you crack the interview. Start and accept this challenge by writing never give up in the comments right now and feel the confidence. What are selectors in CSS? How many types of selectors are there? Let's understand with the help of code. Suppose this is your HTML and you have two elements h1 and paragraph. Now in the external style sheet, we can use the tag name h1 as the selector and we can write the style inside the h1 selector, which will then be applied to the h1 elements of the web page wherever this style sheet is linked. Agree? So this is one kind of selector only, and that is tag or element selector. Similarly, we have four main types of selectors in CSS: class selector, ID selector, element type tag selector. And the fourth, okay, so remember these are the three main types for universal selector, but there are some more which we will see later. So what is the definition of selector is? In CSS, selectors are patterns that are used to select and style HTML elements. Explain the concept of box model in CSS. The box model concept says that if you have elements in your web page, which you obviously have, right? Then every element must follow the box model layout like this. Why is this box model important for every element? If you do not have a box model, then your element will look something like this. And as a website user, are you able to identify these elements properly? No, right? Where is the gap? Where is the border of the element? But after using the box model, the same elements will look something like this. This is a good layout, right? See the same content in of elements but with proper padding, border, margin, right? Then above you can see the box model has four things in it. First, the content, which is the text or image. It can be image, text, or anything. No need to explain. The second is padding, which is the space between the content and the border of the element. Third is the border, which is a line that separates the content from the surrounding elements. Okay. Now here the border thickness is too much, but below it is normal, below element. Okay. The fourth thing is the margin, which is the space between the border of adjacent elements. Okay. So like the bottom here, margin help what margin do? Margin help controlling the space between elements. Okay. And that is the idea. And here are all the details which I have already explained for later reference. And yes, one more thing. In CSS, you can control each of these components using various properties like width, height, padding, border, margin. All these properties will help you to create the box model for your elements, okay? What is the difference between padding and margin? Suppose we all have elements in our web page 1 and elements 1 and 2 with their content like this. Here is the border. Now what is padding? As you can see, padding is the space between the element and the element content and the border. That means padding is the part of the element only, right? Now what is margin then? Margin is the distance that one element maintains from another element. So here you can see element 1 is maintaining this much margin from element 2 and element 2 is also maintaining same margin. So in total, this much of gap is there between the two elements, which is good. And margin is outside of the element, it's not the part of the element like padding. So as per the definition, padding is the space between the content of an element and its border, whereas the margin is the space between the space outside an element, between the elements and its surrounding elements. Okay, great. And these are the element style properties for all the margin and padding. If you set just the margin or just the padding property, then it will be like the same for all the four sides. Okay, left, right, all will be same. But you can also set yes separately them and padding like this for all different. You can set different margin or padding for different sites. Hi friends, just a small notification. This video is part of my full course, Top 300 JavaScript Interview Questions, including HTML, CSS and Bootstrap. All questions PDF book link is also present below in the description. So like these candidates, if you don't want to miss anything for your interviews, then try it. Otherwise, no problem. Let's continue. What is the difference between display inline and display block? Suppose we have this element with two div elements. One has an attribute class block and another has an attribute class inline. And we have text1 and text2 also in between. Now here is the class block and the displays block here. If you see output of this element, then this element takes up the full width of the row by default, okay, by default. So means it does not allow any element on its left or right by default. Whereas if we see the second div element of HTML whose class is set to inline, here the CSS of that class where display property is inline and the output of this element is like this. You can see this element has adjusted itself in between the text1 and text2, right? So it is not taking up the whole row and is just in line with the other elements. So that's why its name is also display inline, right? So that is very much like English thing. The final conclusion and differences: block elements take up the full width of their parent container by default. Most of the time parent is page, but if they are inside the parent container, they will take up the full width. Whereas inline elements take up as much as width as per the width of the content, but not more than that. So that is the difference between inline and block. What is ZIndex property in CSS? How same ZIndex in elements with ZIndex or Z, I pronounce it Z, okay? Elements will be displayed. Suppose we have an HTML with a parent div and inside that we have two nested divs with classes box1 and box2. Here is the CSS for box1. And if you see here, we have the position absolute and ZIndex is 1. Background color is red. So initially we will see a red color for the first div element. But then for the box2, we have the CSS box2 with position absolute and background color blue and ZIndex, focus on this, which is equal to 2. Now because the position is absolute, therefore the second div element will be placed over the first div element is in exactly at the same position. Now the question is, if two elements are at the same place and same position on your web page, then which one will be displayed? The answer is the element that has higher ZIndex in CSS. Therefore, the second div element with blue color will be displayed because it has ZIndex 2, which is higher than the box 1, which has ZIndex 1. Okay, so that is the practicality. And here are 3 points about ZIndex. The ZIndex in CSS is used to control the stacking order of positioned elements. Stacking means one over another like this priority. Second, elements with a higher Z-index will be displayed on the top of the elements with a lower Z-index. Agree. Third, if two elements have, this is the important, the same Z-index, then the one that comes later in the HTML source will appear on top. For example, in our HTML, the div with the box2 class comes later, right? Therefore, again, the same blue color will be displayed at the top. So which one will be later will be the higher. That's the story about ZIndex. The difference between position, relative, absolute, or fixed. Let's understand with the help of an example. Suppose this is the HTML with the 3 div elements with the classes relative box, absolute box, and fixed box. And here is the CSS for the relative with position relative. Similarly, position absolute and for the absolute box class, and position fixed for the fixed box class. Now let's understand the differences by looking at the output of this HTML and CSS. Here you can see the first element relative box is taking up the whole row in a very normal way. Why? because relative is the default value of position attribute. Therefore, even if you delete this position property from here, the element behavior will remain the same, okay? But in case of position absolute, the second absolute box is overlapping the first element, because absolute means what? Absolute means it has an absolute place in the browser, which will, on your web page, sorry, which will not change even if there are already elements present at the same position. That is absolute. So as per CSS, it is like 50 pxs from the top and 20 px from the right. And absolute means it is exactly fixed on that position, irrespective of the surrounding elements. Okay, but yes, if we remove this absolute position position absolute from here, then again by default it will be relative, and then it will not overlap the previous element, and it will be placed in the next row. The third case is when the position is fixed. Fixed is very similar to absolute. As you can see from the CSS, the element is 50 pixels from the bottom and 20 pixels from the right or left, sorry. The question is then, what is the difference between absolute and fixed? The difference is that in case of fixed, even if you scroll the mouse, even then its position will not change. Therefore, it is used to fix header or menus. You have seen websites where you scroll and scroll, but the header will remain at the same fixed position. That is because of this fixed only. But in the case of absolute, if you scroll, then the elements will also move as per the scrolling up and down movement. Okay. So that is the difference, and here are the definitions which I already explained, but these are for the later reference or quick revisions from the book. What are media queries in CSS? For example, you have this HTML with just one h1 tag, and here is the CSS for this h1. In the output, you can see the element with font color red. Now, this is the normal case with a medium laptop screen size. But suppose your requirement is you want a different font color for the mobile screens for the same h1. And we know that mobile screen have less width, right? For that, we will use media queries in CSS like this. This is the syntax for the media queries. You can change the value to anything, this value. Basically, what is it says if the screen size width is less than 768 pixels. For those screen size devices like mobile, the below h1 style, this style will be applicable, not the above one. And therefore, for the same h1 content, we will now see a different output like this in mobile screen. And for more than 768 pixels, the above default style will be applicable, right? Got it? And the definition is very simple. Media queries in CSS allows you to apply different styles to elements based on the size of the device screen. Okay, that's the answer. What is display flex in CSS? Suppose you have a navigation element with multiple elements inside it, and it will display something like this as a menu. These elements are common in every website, right? Now, the problem is that this is not readable enough because the elements are so close and do not have proper gaps between them. They are not basically flexible. It's not a good design, or you can say layout. And here is the better design for the same navigation elements, right? Because the elements have proper gaps between them, they are more readable. And for this kind of layout, we need CSS something like this. Here you can see for the above class nav container, we have two properties. First is display flex, and the another is justify content space around. What is display flex? Display flex turns an element into a container that structures and aligns its child elements in a better way. Okay, let me explain. Basically, it enables a flex box layout for the container. In other words, whenever you have a container and you have elements inside it, then set the property to flex. for the container item, okay, so that the inside elements can be flexible, will be flexible then, and they will adjust themselves, and proper space they will maintain, the child elements. Next property is this justify content, which is also required for flexbox layout. And justify content property, what it does, aligns uh, flex items along the main axis of the flex container. Basically it will put some gap in between the elements. So spacing, you can also say spacing between and around the items, and that is automatically, that is the important thing. So in short, display flex is making the container items flexible, and here are the details for the later reference, okay, which I already explained. What is CSS grid layout? Suppose you have an HTML like this with a parent div element, and inside that you have multiple child div elements. If you do not apply any CSS to this, then without the CSS, the output will be something like this, a vertical line of element by default, which is normal, right? But suppose you want to display the elements like a grid, which is grid is something similar to table, but it is different, okay? Do not have trtd some that. So what you have to do then you have to use the display property with value set to grid. And this second property, which is grid template columns, will determine the number of columns in your grid, okay? 3 auto means 3 columns will be there in the grid like this, that is grid. So that is the grid layout. Basically the definition is, the CSS grid layout module offers a grid based layout system with rows and columns. It is something similar to again to table, but not exactly the table. How? Congratulations for completing all the questions. As I always said, most students study to just learn, but you don't have to just learn, you also have to crack the interview. And facing interviews need courage. For that courage and spirit, all the best from my side. And yes, if you have not yet accepted the never give up challenge until you crack the interview, then accept the challenge now by writing never give up in the comment section. And yes, don't forget to like and subscribe the channel. Thank you.